And I'd like to welcome you all to today's session, which is Health, Productivity and Happiness at Work. Today, we're going to explore the fundamentals of work in modern enterprises, ones that are complex, that are defined by change and constant projects, by increasing regulations. And in particular, we're going to ask the question, how do you achieve a performance-based culture and yet still get projects delivered? So before we start, I'm Matt Duncan. I'm a managing director at Protiviti. Protiviti is a global consulting firm. I'm part of the UK leadership team, and I lead our large-scale change and transformation practice. And as part of that, also look particularly at leading our people advisory area. I'd like to flag in this call the participation of my colleagues from Robert Half. We're part of the same enterprise. Robert Half is the world's first and largest specialized recruitment firm. And as you can imagine, we work together on many engagements where there are both staffing and consulting needs. So you will see on this call a number of my colleagues from Protiviti and a number from Robert Half, and we are collectively happy to support you. So I'd like to make today's session as interactive as possible. So please do start to put questions into the chat for Julie, who I'll introduce in a second, and also for myself. If relevant, we'll be monitoring it as we go, and there will be time for questions at the end. So I'll be keeping my eye on those throughout. So back to today's agenda, and I'm delighted to introduce you to Julie Wacker from Robertson Cooper, who's going to help me unpack this topic. Julie's profile and bio you will have seen in the invitation for this event, and I know it's just been posted into the chat as well. So it's fantastic to have Julie here. Robertson Cooper are a spin-off of Manchester University, and they're occupational psychologists and work with some of the world's most complex multinationals. But as Julie's been telling me, that can also range from shop floors to being in betting shops to the most large-scale blue chips as well. So it's fantastic to welcome Julie. So Julie, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem at all. It's great to have you on. So let's get started. The format of this is going to be very much a discussion between Julie and I to start with, and then we'll go into the Q&A as I said. So Julie, first thing that I'd love to kind of hear from you on, what is the relationship then between health and happiness at work to productivity and performance?
Okay, let's dive in. Well, I guess, we all sort of intuitively can feel that when we feel well, we work well, so are probably much more productive. So it's probably worth just diving into a little bit of the research, which really backs up that intuition that most of us have about that. I mean, well-being itself, sort of if you take well-being as a concept outside of work, so as psychologists, what we class as well-being sort of has two strands. So the first thing is that you experience at least some positive emotions in your life, like you experience some happiness, some excitement. And the second part is actually your life has some meaning as well. So when we look at the concept itself of psychological well-being, we can start to look at the research and say, how does that play out in terms of happiness, in terms of, other performance things that happen in our lives? So, I mean, the first thing to say, it's directly related to health. I think we can all understand that sort of relationship, that symbiotic relationship between health and sort of psychological health as well. So, it's literally linked to lifespan, psychological well-being. It's linked to cardiovascular risk. It's linked to diabetes. It's linked to all sorts of immune reactions. So you can start to see that health thing, it plays alongside psychological well-being, and that actually is directly then linked to things like performance at work. So in a very general sense, you'll start to see that people who have good psychological well-being, that will be correlated very, very highly with productivity. It'll be correlated highly with absence, presenteeism, all those things that matter around performance in the workplace. And that's not just sort of like overall, sort of business outcomes it's correlated to, but actually you'll start to see correlations at the individual level. So the individual themselves will rate themselves better at work if their well-being is high, but also supervisors and managers will rate people higher when their well-being is, their performance higher when the well-being is higher. So the conclusion really is that good well-being equals good performance, and that's across all sort of measures of performance that you might look at in the workplace.
That's great, thank you. So, and I think that's great, because what you're saying there is that there is a causal link between well-being and the performance, and so I guess that's the performance of a business, and I assume then that the rest of our conversation will be based upon that premise.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
So in terms of this concept of well-being, then I have no doubt that everybody on this call will have heard of well-being, will have seen things at work written about it. It's a word that's in a lot of places. So if that's our target that we're aiming for, from your perspective, Julie, what is well-being? What can you give us a definition of this target?
Yeah, and I think so. The definition I gave you before, where there's sort of two things, that is kind of what in psychology terms we'd class as the subjective well-being measure. You've got some meaning in your life, and you get some sense of, positive emotions. And I guess what we do as occupational psychologists, we have to translate what well-being means into the workplace. So we at Robertson Cooper, as you said, we've been doing this. We're out of Manchester University. We've been doing it for over 23 years. And I think one of the problems with talking about well-being at work is if I ask 10 people in an organisation, what does well-being mean? I generally get 10 separate answers. So the challenge has been is to create something which is meaningful for most people when we're describing well-being at work. So we came up with something called the Good Day at Work, and I think it's a really, really easy way to understand what people want from their work in terms of the experience that generates good well-being. So we did a whole load of research, and we look at this concept now of the Good Day at Work, and we've broken down what it means to have a good day at work. And I think we can probably all, there's some coughing somewhere. That wasn't you, Matt, was it?
It wasn't me.
No.
It wasn't me.
The concept of the Good Day at Work is about well-being at work, and we've broken it down into this experience. And I think we can all understand, if you think about yourself, you finish work, it might be whatever time it is, it's 5 o'clock, old school, you close down your laptop and you say, I've had a good day today. What is it that's happened? What is it that's happened for people to be able to enable you to say that I've had a good day at work? And essentially, it boiled down to, having looked at hundreds of thousands of responses on this, 4 things that happen to create a good day at work. So I'll go through them because I think it's a really important part of understanding how you then go about tackling creating good days at work for people. So the first thing is, and it links back to what I said about the subjective well-being, is having some positive emotions. So again, that is, a bit of excitement, I feel engaged with something. If you've heard of things like flow, that might be kind of put in that category. So we have some positive emotions in that day. The second part of a good day at work for people is around that connection you have into your colleagues and your teams. So the working relationship that you have. So things like psychological safety would come under there, the fact that you can speak up, you can talk up about things, the fact that you can collaborate with your colleagues. That's, and I think those 2 first areas of the Good Day at Work are very much what classically people would talk about well-being. It's about feeling good, it's about having good connections at work. So that's classically what we would, perhaps in a lot of organisations perhaps are still in that category, that's what we're aiming for with a good day at work. With well-being, I mean, but actually what the Good Day at Work starts to do is take it into a different sphere with the next 2 items, the next 2 pieces of experience that come up for that. So the third part of a good day at work is actually this task achievement thing. So, go back to you at the end of a day. Most people will describe a good day at work as one where you've been able to actually get through the task that you set yourself, and you don't feel good about yourself unless you have achieved some of those tasks. So task achievement is a really important part of a good day at work, and you can start to see what we're doing here is moving already into the performance aspect of work, that people typically want to come into work and get things done and achieve things. And then the final part of that good day at work experience is that at least some of those tasks that you complete have some meaning. So we don't want a list of meaningless tasks that don't add up to anything, that don't give you any satisfaction. And actually having some meaning behind at least some of those, we're all kind of, we all realistic in the sense that not everything you do has some meaning, but at least some of them have some meaning. So with that experience of the good day at work, what we can start to see that well-being takes on a different sort of tone. Yes, there's that feeling good. Yes, there's feeling connected to your colleagues, but further than that, there's something about performance. People want to come into work and actually do the job that they're meant to do and actually create some impact as well. So hopefully, does that make sense to you? I guess yeah.
It does, and it's fascinating, and the link through from the emotional and in your health, physical and mental, to the performance is really interesting. One thing that I was just reflecting on as you were talking actually is you very much talk about when you get to the end of the day, and how much is that self-reflection important actually in terms of getting to a sense of well-being? Is it possible to have well-being without knowing it? Or is it actually that self-reflection and getting into that habit is a really important part of achieving well-being?
Yeah. I think obviously, I mean, not to get too deep on this, but your own perception on life is definitely how you live life. So if you have good habits around mindfulness, it's almost a mindful state, essentially being conscious of what you're doing. If at the end of the day you start looking at, why did I have a good day at work, what is it that happened, and can I start repeating that? Absolutely, that is very much part of it. I'd say as probably as we move forward, that's one part of it, and there's multiple other things that happen to create a good day at work. But for sure, yeah, there's habits that you can create which help you have more good days at work. Yeah.
Okay, that's super, thank you. And so if the people on this call were to think about how they their day-to-day work, or themselves as leaders, or for me as a leader in my organization, what might I do to start to try and create these more good days at work for the people around me?
Yeah. Well, it's a big question, Matt, but we'll hopefully start to break it down. So how do you go about creating good days at work? So I guess the first thing to sort of think about is, and I think this is probably typical of the marketplace at the moment as well, is it's not necessarily easy to think about that. This is a multifactorial issue that we're talking about. There's going to be multiple reasons why a person has a good day at work or doesn't have a good day at work. And I think the first thing is to start thinking about this in a different mindset, as in a cultural, it's a cultural issue, whether somebody's going to have a good day at work. So what we do as practitioners of this is we start helping organisations break that down into the cultural issues. And I think essentially there's probably sort of three layers around this. So yes, you've got the individuals themselves. So what can an individual do to sort of have more good days at work? What is it in their power to be able to have a good day at work? But then you have to start moving through the organisation. You have to start thinking about managers and leaders. How do they work to create more good days at work, both within their teams, but also maybe for the leaders sort of more culturally. But then also the organisation itself, typically the policies and processes, are they supporting people to have a good day at work? Do you have networks and support services for people who may need extra support, to support them along the way of perhaps high demand periods, so change or mergers, whatever it might be that is going on with the organisation? Have they got the support networks in place? So I think the first mindset around creating good days at work is really thinking about it culturally, and not necessarily just going in straight at that individual level and saying, perhaps a mental health webinar and those sorts of things. What is it structurally you have in the business that can support good days at work?
And practically, so for what would you suggest as some initial steps to get going on that? So if you're to implement the good days at work, have you got any kind of practical suggestions for us, Julie?
Yeah, and I think again you'd probably do that at the sort of 3 layers of what I've sort of talking about. So there's multiple ways to enter um, a cultural kind of view on how you might go about setting the culture to be right for good days at work, to help good days at work rather than hinder them. So if we start at that sort of top level, that organizational level, like thinking about the structures that we have, the team processes we have, the managers that we have, one of the things that is really important is at that organizational level is probably getting some data about understanding, exactly what is driving well-being within this organization. So there's multiple ways you can do this. One of the ways is just the way that we might do this is it's almost like a cultural diagnostic, essentially, at looking specifically at where the pressures might come from. So what we will often hear, and I'm sure pretty much everybody on the line will hear, is I've just got too much to do. So if we think about what we're talking about there, we've got too much to do. We're really highlighting that part of the good day at work where task achievement isn't happening. So I can't get through my tasks. I've got too much to do. And typically the conversation might go to there's too much work. So it's actually about workload. And what I would say, I've been doing this role for a long time now across multiple organisations. It very rarely is about just workload. What tends to happen is different things are stopping you getting on and doing your work. And therefore, you get the sense that I've got too much on and that task achievement isn't happening. So, for example, things that happen other than having too much work might be things like I don't feel like I have autonomy over my own work. So you may be micromanaged, for example, that you don't feel like you can get on and do your work. You don't feel trusted. Everything has to be checked. You don't ever get that sense of satisfaction because your autonomy has been compromised. So something like that can not help you not get on and first of all, have a good day at work, but the specific part of that might be the fact that you can't go on and achieve tasks. So that's just one thing that might, there's other things within that. You might not have the right resources to actually get on and do your work. Is the IT equipment always playing up? Typically we'll hear things like people don't literally have the right equipment, the uniform, the stuff they need to do to get on and do their work. So I think culturally at the data point, what's really important is getting the understanding of what is stopping people doing the work that they want to do. And the message I would say as a takeaway, it is never always just about the actual workload that people have. There will be things within the culture which are stopping them getting on and doing that work.
And that is great and really resonates a lot with a number of the conversations we have with clients as well, Julie. But what I think one of the implications of what you're saying, and it'd be great to get your view on this, is that you've talked about 4 broad areas, and there isn't one that's more important than the other, but one might need more attention at a certain time than the other, and the onus is upon you as a leader to assess what's going on and to look at what's going on and to focus on addressing all 4 of them, but each one might need to be dialed up or dialed down dependent on the situation at the time. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say. The table and the wonky legs, I think so. Yeah, the data piece, the manager piece, or the leader piece is always really helpful. I think just to rewind slightly to your previous question was, I well-being, if we can start to sort of create a thread of what we've talked about, well-being can drive good performance. The research is clear from that. That's fine. So organizations may often hear, okay, let's do well-being then. Let's do well-being. It can be a driver of performance. However, what the market is sort of typically driving organizations to do is go in at just the individual level and not really think about the manager level and not think about that sort of leadership organizational level. So, I would say to you, absolutely, you need to be doing all of those to create that culture, but it's actually quite difficult to do that. So for example, what I was just saying before about getting data to understand what is helping and hindering good day at work, some of that's quite difficult to hear. Some of that's not easy to address. And actually, well-being on its surface appears to be a really, okay, we'll do a few webinars about it type thing. But actually, if you want to do it right, we're talking about really unpacking what is going on right throughout the organization with managers, with leaders, with the whole culture, essentially. If you want to use well-being, get well people in your organization to drive really that high performance that most businesses are looking at. It's quite hard. Yeah.
And Julie, when we met in preparation for this call, one of the questions I asked you was whose responsibility is this within an organisation? Do you think who should be thinking about creating an environment where well-being for all people is commonplace, and where it becomes part of the culture and is linked to performance? Is there a certain role or a function or a team that this sits with?
Yeah, I think what we're getting at here is, well-being is, there's no doubt it is multidisciplinary. It threads through every part of the organization. I know in an ideal world, you would have somebody driving that on a leadership team. However, the reality is that there's a lot of, it's either sits in HR or it sits in safety, for example. So, if you're in a safety critical environment, often it sits right alongside well-being, often sits right alongside that safety aspect, because obviously there's links from psychological well-being into safety outcomes as well. So, it is multidisciplinary, and that is what well-being needs to become cultural, is cross-functional engagement with this. And typically the only way you can really achieve that is with somebody on the top teams who owns it as a directive. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's very consistent with what we see as well. And that link to performance then becomes a real key incentive for that to happen as well. So it in theory becomes a self kind of fulfilling circle.
Yeah.
So Julie, I'll before I go on with any more of my questions, we've started to get some in the chat, of which there's a range, and I'll kind of take a deep breath for the first one, which I'll read out from John, which is so well-being, feeling good, and getting on with colleagues and getting things done. In Australia, as per the Australian Community Workers Association, 41% of all households have some form of domestic violence. Considering this environment, how do you have any pointers on how to engage an organisation and have good, healthy collaboration?
I think I've got that question. I think perhaps where the answer lies in all of this, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's, substance abuse, whatever is going on for that individual, the reason we start looking at the cultural aspects to it, one of the ways I quite like to describe this, what does a good culture actually look like? Perhaps we can go there in terms of wellbeing, and I'll bring that back to the question, is you will have individuals turning up to work in multiple states. So, they've got things outside of work going on. There might be things inside of work going on. A good culture of well-being is one where that person is empowered to take control of their own well-being. So therefore the responsibility of the culture lies in providing the right support services that they can go to when they need it. And there's all sorts of sort of parameters around that. So that I think, the question I think was about, oh God.
So I think I'd interpret it as with in a community where you've got a lot of domestic violence or a difficult kind of societal situation, how do you then engage with organisations, knowing that the context
really
is
sorry,
likely?
I think I keep cutting out. Hold on.
Can you
So
hear us
sorry,
now?
Matt. I kept cutting out then. Would you repeat? I cut out completely then. My line dropped.
Not a problem. Fortunately, you're still here, because that would have led to a very one-way conversation between me, myself, and I. So I think the context of this question is that in a society where there might be where there is, according to the Australian Community Workers Association, high levels of domestic violence. Knowing that's the societal context in Australia, how do you engage with organisations to encourage healthy collaboration to create a sense of well-being at work when you know that there is a broader kind of environmental factor like that.
Picture.
Yeah.
So, and I think this, what I would say about this, it's quite a complex answer in the sense that an organisation has its own culture and has to decide its lines of responsibility. Yeah, so some organisations that we work with have a really high level of responsibility, sort of on a spectrum. They will say, I don't care why people come into work with poor well-being, and I want to provide the support for them. And therefore, they provide all the scaffolding to be able to do that, to the support services, and say, look, we're here to support you. We know you're going to arrive at work, given the circumstances that you're in, and there's domestic violence support for you, there's counsellors to be able to help you in that situation, and they want to do that. Other organisations don't do that, and this is where the cultural aspects come to. So perhaps, if I think about a law firm, for example, that they expect long hours, they expect different things for you, and actually you expect to just kind of crack on and get on with it. And this is where the cultural aspect comes to it. So I would say to an organisation in that circumstance, that the fact you're even asking the question tells me you're further up this spectrum, that you want to be able to provide support for people who come into your business, because they're going to need that to perform well. So, and I think that, that we're talking about levels of responsibility here of, what the lines are for organisations. And as I say, if you're an organisation who wants to drive good performance, knowing that that's the context, that 41% of people are probably experiencing some form of domestic violence in that community, it's more than likely that your responsibility is going to say, I want to be able to support these people to be well at work, and therefore I'm going to put support services in there because I know that's how my business is going to perform the best. So there's lots of little decisions around these things, and I think, but ultimately the picture is always the same for an organisation, is about saying, what is it that it looks like in my business? What is the support that I want to put as the sort of scaffold, the support services that are right? And I think one of the questions is always about, what do employees need as well? And that's kind of where it goes back to the data. So you've got a very specific example there, that there's people in that environment who've experienced high levels of domestic violence. I know what my people need there, but if I asked any organisation on this line, do I definitely know what people need to have a good day at work? And I think that's sort of where you start the process of this, of understanding, and that might be through data, it could be through conversation, focus groups, whatever data you've got, but understanding specifically what people need. And I can probably say categorically, I've never come across an organisation which needs a mindfulness app, by the way. That generally isn't the thing that people need.
Yeah. And that's often seen as the answer to the well-being issue, right? So we've ticked that box and we've put in place something like that, or we've put up a few posters. I completely agree. Using that as a segue, and what's a clear theme running throughout your kind of this discussion is the importance of data and actually getting to understand the people that are working for you, and the environmental context, but also then you're going to want to have data on performance as well, and there becomes then that thread through all of this. What types of information metrics would you recommend people on this webinar to start to think about collecting in their organization, so that they can start to get a grasp of this topic, to understand to get some kind of sense of what the areas that they should be addressing within their own organizations?
So the thing that you really need to know when it comes to creating this culture of where people can have a good day at work is what is driving it. So we have our own model around this. However, there are other things around there. If you've ever heard of the sort of stress risk assessment, management standards type of approach, what we're looking at when we look at that, they have their 6 pillars, we have that as well, is that you need to understand what is the heart of it. It's almost like a diagnostic view of this. But it's not to sit that just on its own. So you rightly say to me, that needs to link to productivity. It needs to link to the actual scores around well-being. It actually needs to link to things like absence as well. So some of our most, far-reaching, developed clients on this, what they've got is the causal model going all the way through. So you've got the causes, you've got the drivers, you've got the outcomes around health and well-being. You've got then the outcomes around productivity, intention to leave, advocacy, those sorts of things. And you can start to get to a point where you understand. So your first point is like, I need to see that. I need to understand specifically what is causing poor well-being in my organisation and how that's impacting on performance. But ultimately, where you can get to, if you really want to kind of go for this, is predictive modelling as well. You can start to actually look at patterns that happen within your organisation and say, this profile, this group of people here who are showing the signs of whatever it might be in your organisation, I know they're going to leave. Yeah, they really, there's a high likelihood, and would have a number on this, that they're going to leave. So I can start to get super preventative as well. I think preventative is a word we've not talked about yet, and that's ultimately what you want that data to be able to allow you to do. Can I get preventative? So before people are going to go off sick, before people are going to leave this organisation, can I do something in the work environment to make sure that doesn't happen? Yeah.
And that's particularly relevant for a number of conversations we've had recently, actually, Julia, around that preventative part, trying to get the predictive analytics, trying to understand that there are either groupings of sentiment or behaviors or a dynamic that actually we can see what is likely to happen, and putting in place proactive measures. Have you seen yet many examples, and you don't have to name specific organizations, but have you seen many examples of organizations getting the predictive element of this right and being quite forward thinking in that area? Or is it a relatively new concept?
Relatively new, but we're doing it more and more. We've got a couple of clients who've been doing it a couple of years, so they're able to predict leavers in particular. And it's possible to do that, but I think things that are helping us do it, so obviously you need a place to integrate. So Power BI is now becoming a really useful tool for us, so you can start integrating all your data in one place. So you might have an engagement survey, and just one note on engagement surveys. So I'll often talk to people about what data they've got around wellbeing, and they'll say we do an engagement survey and we have some wellbeing questions in there. I, as an occupational psychologist, will say that is not wellbeing data. It's a rating of well-being. But if you think about what as we're saying, already, we need to understand the drivers of well-being. And one of the really just annoying things about engagement is the relationship between it and it keeps going out. Okay, I'm so sorry. This is like classic.
You're back.
Classic Teams call, isn't it? Sorry. Yeah.
It is.
But just to say that one thing about engagement, its relationship to well-being, because people say I've got data from my engagement survey, but I'm going to give you a really good example of why it's dangerous to rely on an engagement score. So imagine an organisation, let's go with the law firm I mentioned before. You're going to have professional people in that who are mega engaged, and I will get a really, really, really good engagement score. But if I also look at well-being, I often have a really low well-being score, because over engagement is such a thing where people push themselves to burnout. So it's really dangerous to look at, if you're really interested in well-being, it is dangerous to look at engagement in its isolation, because over engagement, so the higher the engagement score goes, it's quite possible that the lower the well-being score goes, because people can become over engaged and they don't look after their own well-being. We were going somewhere else on that track though, Matt, weren't we? And I've interrupted myself.
But I think that's a really important point, and I am sure that will resonate with everybody on this call, because there is almost a corporate culture now of chasing those engagement scores, and without being thoughtful about it, that there are those unforeseen risks that you're talking about. It's a nice segue to one question we've had from Clive, actually, which is, How do you keep pressure in today's in kind of working environment, be that office or virtual, for performance, or is there such a good thing as good pressure now? So just wanted your perspective on that, because if we're talking about performance, that comes with I'm sure for lots of us traditional views of driving teams hard, achieving business, your traditional business metrics, top and bottom line growth, etc., etc. So is there such a thing as good pressure in this context?
100%. Yes, that's what we should be aiming for. Go back to the good day at work. I want to achieve things. I want to create some meaning. The only way I can do that is there's going to be some pressure. And I think, we've sort of toppled well-being into this nicey nice thing, whereas generally, you can probably gather from how I talk about well-being, it's not fluffy at all. The only thing we want to do in the workplace is keep pressure positive. We've got multiple papers about how we keep pressure positive, but one of the ways in which you're able to do that is you have to have the understanding of what pressure is and the sources of pressure, and that does go back to our model. It's called the 6 Essentials, which identifies all the sources of pressure in the workplace. Now, and it's almost like, when I was talking before about understanding, when people say, I've just got too much to do, I've just got too much to do, we have to change that conversation into understanding where that pressure is coming from. And, we have to think, I'm pretty sure people on the line will have seen sort of the pressure performance model, where well-being is at the poorest when pressure is low, because I'm not getting a sense of achievement. I'm just procrastinating. I've got nothing to really feel like I'm adding any meaning. So well-being is as low at that end when there's no pressure as it is at the other end, that when it's high pressure. And what we really want to do, and I'm doing it with my hands because I don't have a diagram to show you, but there is a diagram called the pressure performance curve, which is all about keeping pressure just at that point where performance is the highest. You've got that healthy pressure, and the ways in which you, before it goes into burnout, and the ways in which you keep that line right, so you're not tipping over into burnout and you're not tipping over into what we call rust out. That's where the culture comes in. So what are your managers doing? Do they understand what that place is? Do they understand how to have a conversation, how to recognize when someone in their team is tipping into the burnout or has gone into the rust out and kind of exited the building? And then also, how does the organization support that? So what are their policies around unsociable hours? We worked with a big global client. We did loads of work with them, and one of the only things they needed to do, because everyone was doing all these time zone calls, was give guidance around cross time zone unsociable calls. We don't want you doing on the Monday morning, and we don't want you doing on the Friday night. That's our guideline. If you have to do them, that's fine. But actually, we know this is causing pressure for people in their work-life balance. So absolutely, we want pressure, and that's kind of a dirty word, I guess, in today's world a little bit, but people respond better. They get a sense of well-being from good, healthy, positive pressure.
And personally, I 100% agree with that, and I think that will probably cheer a lot of people up on this call as well, because I think the well-being has become something that is nice and fluffy, and it's just an easy thing to do and tick the box without really challenging yourself to think about what that well-being means in the broader context. And with that pressure point, I'm going to try and link 2 questions that we've got in the chat, because I think that there are words that are coming up that are going to be linked with the word pressure. So the first one is around resilience being a commonly used term, and how do you build a sense of resilience in that kind of with that tipping point you talked about, and then related to that, there's a question from Phil as well, which is, given burnout can sometimes sneak up on you even when you think you're managing it, how do you prevent that? Now, I suspect some of that's been you've answered already, but just linking those 2, separate them out if you want, Julie.
I might do.
But
Let's go
linking
resilience
those 2.
first. Let's go resilience first. Now I can talk about kind of that. The second question does lead on. So it's almost about where do you apply your resilience, but also is sometimes resilience not quite enough. There's other things that perhaps you need to do. So just to be kind of keep it coherent in sense of what I've talked about so far, when we talk about resilience, we're again going in just that individual level. And the first word of warning about that is, hopefully what we've talked about today is it has to be cultural. And the word of warning is that if you just do resilience, I can guarantee there's a possibility that you might do more harm than good. If you're in a high pressure environment, like let's people respond to high pressure environments. But let's say there's been a lot of change, lots of things have been going on for the organisation. There's been, high demand projects going on. And somebody says to you, I just want you to be more resilient. It doesn't typically go down very well. Yeah. And, or say, for example, you've got bad manager and you've got, there's all sorts of things going on. To be more resilient on its own without the cultural stuff, other stuff going on, is not a good strategy in terms of developing well-being. However, if you're doing both hand in hand, if you're going, do you know what, we're working on this cultural environment, the managers are working, the leaders are really behind this, and actually we want you to positively support you being more resilient, it absolutely is something that is part of the culture. Oh.
Okay, we'll give Julie a second and hope that she rejoins.
It's Virgin Media I'm on, by the way, so let's just give them a shout out. Yeah.
So okay.
Yeah,
and I think we got that. But was there anything else on the resilience part? So then it'd be interesting to hear about the burnout element.
Yeah, so resilience plays its role, and you can, as an individual, develop your resilience. There's no doubt the research tells you that you can start to withstand more pressure, as an individual if you put some work into it. There is actually a free report on our website if people want to have a look at that, called iResilience, which is a really great starting point for thinking about how to develop resilience. But it's not going to be the be all and end all. If you've got, some pressure keeps on piling on, let's go negative pressure, that it genuinely is unsociable hours, your work-life balance is out, completely gone, you've got a bad manager, resilience is not going to fix that. You can't just become too resilient to that. So there's multiple things that need to happen around that. So first of all, the individual needs to recognize their own signs and symptoms. So I often talk about, what happens to you as you're going, and this is going back to probably one of your first points about being mindful of what happens to you as you move through that curve. So I'm having a good day, but I can feel that this has been hard, this has been really hard. What are the little behaviors that you exhibit? So it might be that you lose your sense of humor, can't be bothered talking to people, I just want to, things like that. There's going to be little signs and symptoms that you personally need to become aware of. A good manager would become aware of those as well and have a conversation about that. But that's, it's about that early warning sign and knowing that for yourself. So, you asked me at the very beginning of this webinar, is it worthwhile kind of being a bit mindful at the end of the day? Yes, it is. But it is, there's, knowing those little tipping points early is the thing. There's a tendency for certain personality types. I think the person who asked the question probably knows this personality type, to put your head down, crack on, just keep doing it. I'll be all right tomorrow, I'll be all right next week. It's not the long-term solution, because people who do that typically the ones who go to absolute burnout and absolutely end up being off work longer. So you do have to sort of train yourself to sort of take those early warning signs.
Yeah. And that goes back to our reflective and mindful about yourself point as well, doesn't it? There's a comment in the chat actually that says it never seems to drop for our audience, so keep talking, please, because
oh really? Can you hear me going, oh god, it's gone again?
So,
yeah.
So just so that you know. You used a term that I hadn't heard before, rust out. Could you I think I got a sense of it by the way your hand went on your scale, but could you just explain that one a bit more, please?
Yeah, so on the pressure performance curve, we've got that in the middle, and I think we're all super familiar with burnout. That there's too much going on. There's probably some very negative pressures as well. But at the other end of that is probably a work environment where you have meetings for meeting's sake. No one's ever making a decision on things. Clear goals. There's nothing really clear about what I need to achieve today. And that's where people are just sort of clock watching, procrastinating. And it really speaks to the fact that people need pressure. I need some goals. I need some actions that I can, create some impact with. I need something to say I've done at the end of the day. So it typically, where we would see more rust out is when I would say public sector, or can you imagine that sort of public sector meetings about everything takes dinosaur years to get through, what we're going to do to the next meeting, and it's that sort of environment where people see rust out, and it is as bad for well-being as the other end of burnout.
Yeah, and I can totally kind of engage with that point. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've got a few more questions. One I've avoided the topic till now, but obviously there's been a couple of questions on that hybrid working.
Hybrid
So
working, yeah.
So are there any tips that you've got in a hybrid working environment when you're trying in the context of this conversation around balancing those employees who are in the office and those who are working remotely, and the kind of the collaboration between them? Is there anything that you've seen work really, really well, or any kind of broad guidance you'd have for this audience today?
Yeah, I think the thing with hybrid, so it's almost like, many of the models that we've used for years are just sort of get shifted around so that the pressures become different in hybrid, is what I'm saying. So it's still the same conversation that I've said before about understanding what the pressures are in a hybrid environment and therefore applying the right solutions. So let's sort of have a think about hybrid working, what's different. So the first thing that's obviously going to be different is work relationships. And we know that you can't connect with people as well. You don't connect with people as well. And when you do, it's different. So the solutions kind of, okay, we can think about those afterwards, but let's carry on with sort of what's different. So is it as clear culturally what is expected of you? So one of the things that I know people were worried about in my profession at the beginning of sort of remote working, hybrid working, is how long you can keep the culture going when people are working remotely. So by that, if we take culture, its basic definition of this is how we do things around here, all of a sudden that's up in the air. So let's just take those two pressures that are different, that the cultural pressures and perhaps the work relationship pressures, that actually we need to think about innovative ways in which we maintain relationships with our colleagues, that we can create that good dialogue, because we don't want to lose that collaboration that people have. So we all know when we go back into the office, I mean, when I go back into the office, I probably do my productivity goes down 50% in terms of what I'm doing, but actually it's all about collaborating and learning again and talking through things with people. So I do think you have to maintain some boundary and some clear directive around how people are going to collaborate when you're talking about hybrid working. It's an absolute no-brainer. You have to make that part of the new culture. And then the second thing is about making sure goals and things that you're expecting of people to do are absolutely crystal clear and 100% crystal clear, because you haven't got the opportunity to check in what people are doing throughout the day, whatever it might be. So I would say two things that kind of to drive action are around those relationships and keeping the collaboration going, but also around the clear goals and actions. Do people know exactly what is expected of them when they're in a hybrid situation? And those are the two kind of top ones for me. Yeah,
that's great, thank you. And I'm conscious that we're 10 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you one more question from the chat, and then Julie, just to to headline to you, then great to come back to good days at work, for you to talk about that at the end as well. So just as a segue into that, question from Gary is how do mission and purpose link to motivation, and or do you need to break these down into different departments, projects and pieces of work?
So mission
and purpose link to motivation?
100%. Yeah, well, they're absolutely all linked together. And I think that's, we talked about this before, that when you actually look at well-being in its entirety, not just having a yoga at lunchtime approach to it, absolutely you need meaning, because that's part of well-being. I need some meaning. So I need to know what my purpose is, and I need to know what my purpose is, what my team's purpose is. There's almost like a pyramid of purposes in organizations, if that makes sense, that I need to know what me as an individual uniquely offers to this organization. What do I give? Then I need to know what my team does. Like what role does my team play in this organization, in this business? What do we bring to this, and how do we add value? And then obviously there's a sort of everybody version of the purpose. I mean, you could extend that actually into general life as well, but let's not get too deep about it. So purpose is part of well-being, 100%. So those mission statements, all those things that you have, they give people purpose. And I think it's often just about aligning that throughout the culture and making sure that's clear. And, if I feel, it goes back to the old NASA one, I'm sure everyone knows it, when was it Kennedy? One of them went to NASA and said to the janitor, "What is it you do here? I'm helping to get the man to the moon." He's a guy who knows his own purpose. He might just be doing the cleaning, but he's part of this big system. He's part of a team. He's part of an organization where he is adding value, and he has a good sense of well-being and is performing well because of that. So yes, 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 yes to purpose and missions. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And so, Julie, bringing us back to good days at work, and then practically applying this. I know you talked. I asked you the question earlier around what might be kind of people take away from this. I think you've got kind of and you've talked about assessment and a bit of a challenge. I want to talk about that a bit more, and just helping this audience as a takeaway think about what they might do to start to create these good days at work within their own organizations.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we can safely say, what I would hope people can take away from this is that this link between well-being and performance is obvious when it's obvious, but actually tackling it is quite hard, and it does take some courage, because we're opening cans of worms in some senses. But the well-being washing is easy, but the actual cultural proper well-being work is difficult. So there's those three layers to look at, us as an organization, then the manager team level, and then the individuals themselves, and keep those three layers in mind as you're kind of working through this. So we've got a thing which we're going to offer out to everybody today, which is it's completely free, of course, and it's called the Good Day at Work Challenge. Now, what I would put the challenge out to the people who are on the call is, can we start to use this? So what this particular challenge does is it's at that individual level. So it's for every employee. So what it challenges them to do is create more good days at work for themselves. So we give them a very short questionnaire. I think it's 5 or up to 10 questions. I can't remember. And it asks them about the good day at work, and it will generate a personal report for everybody who does it. So they get their own little good day at work report. And then every day, once they sign up, they're going to get a video. And the challenge is to create more good days at work over kind of over 4 sessions, 10-minute sessions, or / over a week. So that's their challenge. So knowing what we've talked about today, we're going in at the individual level. So it's something fun to offer out to your individual employees, but maybe the challenge for people on this call today is actually start thinking about how they can use that tool to go into the other layers. So is there a way in which people can mobilize their managers and say, do you know what, we're going to do this Good Day at Work challenge with everybody. I'd really like you guys to start having a wellbeing conversation with people in your team and start understanding what is going on in your team in terms of what's helping and hindering good days at work. Do it together as a fun activity, and then perhaps you might be able to get an organizational view. What typically have we heard why people might not be having good days at work in this organization? Can you get the conversation going with it? So I think it's just been put in the chat. It's a link. You can send it out to as many people as you like. As I say, everybody gets a little report for themselves at the beginning and at the end. And that is just a really nice, easy way to start thinking about well-being culturally. It's still going at the individual level, but there's some work that you might want to do around that with your managers and actually with the leadership team, introducing the concept of good day at work and starting to think about why people might not be having good days at work. Would that work?
Brilliant. Yeah. I think that's brilliant, and I'll personally take away to do that and to do that with my team, and I hope everyone else does. It's good to finish a conversation like this with something practical and something that everybody on here has access to. So please take it away. It's a great tool. Just before then, we wrap up and try and give people a couple of minutes back for those in the UK at lunchtime, but for the other parts of the day for those people globally as well. Julie, are there any final comments or thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
So I think maybe that, given I've been banging on about it being cultural, what are some top things that you might be able to do alongside sort of the good day at work thing? There's probably some really no regret actions that people can take if they really want to start thinking about this sort of more cultural approach to well-being. The first thing is really probably around sort of leadership buy-in. You know, how do you present that business case to the leaders? How do you shift well-being from being a fluffy thing into performance? Now, we do have some tools, again, they're free as well, which we can help with on that, which literally says if you increase well-being by one standard deviation, this is sort of return you can get on this. So that, I think that shift from well-being being fluffy to actually being performance-led is really important at that senior leader level. We need to prove the business case as to what type of return on investment you can get there. So I think that's absolutely, no regret action. I think the other thing is to start thinking cross-functionally. If currently it's a very HR function, how can you engage other functions in well-being, given that it's all about performance, given that it's all about, what everybody is bothered about at kind of in any organization, any business. And then perhaps via the Good Don't Work Challenge or by other data that you have, start opening the lid on some of those systemic issues to really say, do I understand what is helping or hindering good days at work? It might not be about collecting new data at the moment. It might be just about consolidating at the moment, just taking a moment to think about what is stopping it at the moment. Perhaps, use a guiding model. If the 6 essentials model can be really helpful for that. Do I know if people have the right resources? Do I know what work relationships are like? Do I know people have autonomy? And you can start to build up a picture to kind of help your direction. I could go on, but I can see your time, etc. But I'd see those 3 things, thinking about the business case and shifting that from it being fluffy into something which is about performance and cross-functional, and also then starting to map, really understand what is going on in your business, what is helping or hindering good days at work, and perhaps use a Good Day at Work challenge to do that.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. And I heard your piece around making it a leadership priority as well, which completely makes sense. So Julie, thank you. So it leaves me to thank everybody in the audience for the participation. So thank you for all of the great questions we've had. Apologies to those of you that we didn't manage to answer all of them, but I really appreciate that and really appreciate the engagement. Julie, huge thank you to you. So Julie from Robertson Cooper and to Robertson Cooper as well, and for the Good Days at Work Challenge. It's great to have something that's a discussion where we've got some practical, implementable next steps to take as well. So we really appreciate that. One final thing I'd just like to flag to everybody is on June the 13th. So our next is London Tech Week, and my colleague Michelle Moody will be interviewing Anne-Marie Imafadon, who is, you may have seen that she's a maths genius on Countdown to Channel 4, and she will be discussing STEM subjects at schools and talent attraction and how to make the tech sector or any sector more inclusive as an employer. So hopefully we'll get a few of you on there as well. So thank you all. Thank you, Julie, and have a good rest of your day, everybody.
All right. Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.